Good afternoon, Chair. Our next witness is Mr. Scott Darlington.
Just stand up and repeat after me. I do solemnly, sincerely and truly
I do solemnly, sincerely and truly
declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
Stand, please.
Mr. Darlington, as you know, my name is Catriona Hodge, and I ask questions on behalf of the inquiry. Please, can you state your full name?
Scott Richard Darlington.
You made a witness statement on the 8th of January of this year, is that correct?
That's right.
Do you have a copy of your
I
statement
do,
before
yes,
you?
I do.
Please, could you turn to the final page of your statement at page 24?
Okay.
Is that your signature that you
It
can
is,
see?
yeah.
When you made that statement on the 8th of January, was the content true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Yes, it was, yeah.
I'd like to begin by asking a few questions about your background, Mr. Darlington.
Okay.
How old are you?
I'm 59.
As a young man, you attended music college, is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Is music is and was a big part of your life?
Yeah, it was actually, yeah. Still is to a certain degree, but at the time it was, yeah.
You attained an HND in sound engineering, is that correct?
That's right.
And you were later obtained an apprenticeship at ICI Pharmaceuticals.
That was before, actually. When I left school, I did ICI.
You had a number of jobs, I understand, in the music and engineering industries, is that right?
Yeah.
After that. And when your mother fell ill, you helped her to run her business, is that correct?
That's right.
When your mother passed, you sold that business, is
Yeah.
that right? And went on to use the proceeds to buy a post office branch.
That's right.
Which branch did you purchase, Mr. Darlington?
Alderley Edge, which is in South Manchester in Cheshire.
Can you describe the village in which it was located, please?
It's a very wealthy area, actually. It's sort of footballers' area. It's not a very large village, but very well-to-do.
Why did you decide to purchase that particular branch?
I wasn't actually looking to be a postmaster at the time. I was looking for a business to buy that I could improve and basically to, steady the ship financially for me and my daughter and partner at the time. And when I saw the Alderley Edge branch for sale, I went to have a look at it, and all the figures that came with it, it all seemed to add up, so I took it on.
What did you know about running a post office branch when you...
Nothing when I first took it, when I first applied to do it.
What did the previous sub-postmaster tell you about his or her experience of running that branch?
They told me that it was a nice place, and the people were very nice, and it was busy, and I could see from the figures that we had from his running it before that it was profitable and a good going concern.
In which year did you take over the running of the Alderley Edge branch?
2005.
Did the previous sub-postmaster alert you to any problems that they'd experienced with
No.
Horizon?
No.
How much did you pay for the branch?
154,000.
What did that purchase price cover?
That purchase was basically the goodwill, really, because you didn't buy the property, you just took over and the fixtures and fittings and the stock.
Were you able to purchase that goodwill, the business, outright?
Well, with some help from my brother, who also put a little bit of money in at the beginning. He bought the stock, basically. And but apart from that, yes. Yeah.
Did you require a mortgage to purchase the branch?
Yes. I actually borrowed some money against my house. 110,000, I think it was, against my house, plus my input and my brother's input to get to the 154,000.
So you owned a home at the time?
Yeah.
But with whom did you share that home?
This was with my partner at the time, who was the mother of my only daughter.
And forgive me, what was the value of your mortgage? I think you...
For the post office?
The mortgage on your house?
The whole thing. I think with the post office as well, about 145 to 150,000.
When you purchased the branch, you were appointed the sub-postmaster, is that
Yeah.
correct? Do you recall how you came to be appointed?
I remember it taking a long time from the initial application to actually taking it over. Was it pretty much a year? It's a long process.
Did you attend an interview as part of that process?
Yeah.
What were you told during your interview about your obligation to repay any accounting shortfalls?
I wasn't told anything about that then, only on reading the contract.
Do you recall when you started working at the branch, what the date was?
I think it was March. I can't remember the exact date, if I'm honest. It was February or March 2005.
What types of products and services did you sell from your branch?
Everything really. The post office, everything that a post office does, foreign currency, absolutely the full range.
Was it solely post office products and services?
There was a shop, quite a large shop attached to the front as well, but at the back was a 3-position post office at the back of the shop.
Did you employ staff in the branch?
Yes, I did, yeah.
How many?
There was a mixture of about 5 people, but apart from myself, two people at any one time, somebody in the shop and somebody working with me behind the post office.
What was the salary that you received from the post office as your work as a sub-postmaster?
About 56,000.
Was 56,000 from the time you started, or was that a figure?
That was what the previous postmaster was getting, and pretty much it varied slightly because a lot of it was based on transactions, but it was around between 52 and 55 for the time I was there. 56, sorry.
I think you've mentioned Horizon had been installed in the branch before you
Yes,
arrived.
it's already in, yeah.
What training did you receive on the use of Horizon when you took over?
I did actually receive 10 days training in Liverpool at their main training branch there.
Did you find the training to be of practical use?
At first it seemed to be okay, they were taking through everything, but it was generally role play, customers pretending to come up and then you doing the transactions like that.
What training did you receive on how to balance the accounts?
Only one occasion did we do the balance, and nobody could quite understand it, to be honest. There was only one run through.
Did you receive any further training in branch, for example?
For a week, the first week that I took over the branch, I did have a trainer that sat in and watched what you did for the first week.
Did you experience any discrepancies in your accounts during that first week?
A small one, yeah, £6, about £6.
What advice did you receive from the trainer in relation to that discrepancy?
I was told that it was very unlikely for it to balance to the penny every time because there's always going to be some kind of human error. And for small discrepancies, it wasn't really worth investigating, drilling down to find that because it was only a small amount compared to the amount of money that was transacted, if you see what I mean, through the branch. So to put the money in and see if it comes back next balance.
Were you content with the advice that you'd been given?
At the time, I just presumed this was the way it must operate. I didn't, think this is bad or this is terrible. I presumed that's how it must work.
I'd like to ask you about your experience of contacting the helpline.
Mm-hmm.
When would you have contacted the helpline?
Well, after the trainer had gone, things, people used to come in doing transactions that I'd never been trained on or even seen yet. So quite often you used to have to ring the helpline for them to talk you through.
I'd like to ask you specifically about your experience of handling gyro checks.
Mm-hmm.
Can you please describe what a gyro check is?
A lot of the local business used to pay money in using Gyro, and I think it's a cheaper form of banking than other banking, which is why they did that. The cash depositing cash basically in cheques into their account through the post office. And it was a very large book with the total breakdown of the cash that was paid in, and obviously you check that against it, stamped their portion, stamped your portion, tore that off, you gave them the book back, and this would go into your till for reconciling with at the end of the day.
How were gyro checks processed when you when you first came in? You've described what sounds like a paper-based system.
Yeah, it was paper-based, and at the end of the day, you'd print out all the gyro checks that had been put in, and you'd make sure that they tallied with what you'd actually got on a physical basis, and if that did, what was known as you cut that off, so any further transactions would go into the next day, and these gyro slips were then posted off to, I think it was Chesterfield, to their sort of centre that dealt with all the paperwork.
You've talked about a paper slip. Was that something that you retained as
That's
proof
it.
of the transaction?
I retained that, yeah.
And you would then send it to the post office?
Once that you'd verified that
reconcile.
everything that had been entered on the computer did tally with everything you'd received, that would then go off to the clearing centre, yeah.
How did that process change?
All of a sudden it became automated with a barcode on the paying in books. So when the customers came in, you just scanned their barcode, it came up on the screen who they were, you put in, you entered the amount of money and the denomination of money that they brought in, and then when you okayed it, there was nothing for you. You just stamped their entire book and gave it back to them. You just had a little slip with no details on it really, no information, no account number really properly, just a little slip. And that was all. There was no way of checking things properly afterwards.
So you retained a slip, you say. What information was recorded on that?
Literally just the time and how much.
What effect did that have on your ability to
Well,
verify the transaction?
the postmaster I was working with, we looked at each other and thought, this is strange. How are we going to check the reconciliation against this? So I did actually ring the helpline to ask how this change would affect our side of things. So I asked them how I can reconcile these transactions when I haven't got the slips that they used. So they escalated this phone call to a slightly higher area of Horizon Help, and they rang me back, and their exact words were, "We don't know."
Did you receive any further advice or clarification?
No. So alarm bells did ring slightly with that from the off.
How did you resolve the problems you had with the discrepancies with Gyrotech?
There was no way of doing it really. You didn't even know if any discrepancies were down to the gyro checks because you'd got no paperwork to actually check them off to what you'd done.
At what times of day were you able to contact the helpline?
You could sort of contact them any time in the day up till I think it was 6 o'clock at first, then they made it 8 o'clock, I think, on a balance night.
You've mentioned on balance night it was open till 8.
I think it was, yeah.
Was that sufficient when you were
Not really, actually, because quite often when you rang, it was engaged because everybody was doing a balance on a Wednesday night. So there was a lot of people that were ringing up to have things checked for them, and you couldn't get through. And then eventually the line would close, you know what I mean, and you still hadn't got through.
Did you try and resolve discrepancies yourself?
Yeah, generally you could, you know, like I say, most of the time, for instance, if you'd finished a transaction to a cheque and it was actually cash to put it in, when you came to actually do the reconciliation at the end of the evening, you could see that you'd got a cheque and know you hadn't put it in as a cheque, so you could reverse that and put it in correctly and everything was fine. You know, you could do things like that.
I'd like to ask you about a discrepancy which occurred in around May 2008.
Mm-hmm.
Do you recall what the value of that discrepancy was?
1,700.
To which stock did the discrepancy relate?
This was against stamps, the stamps holding in the branch.
What did you do when the discrepancy arose?
Well, we couldn't understand it because the previous balance had been correct within the odd stamp. You do get the odd slight mistake where a second class has been sold instead of a first, things like that. But within a stamp or two, it was correct, and I had no further deliveries of stamps in between that balance and the balance where it said I'd got £1,700 worth of stamps more in the branch than I'd actually got.
You knew that couldn't be right because you hadn't received any more.
I hadn't received any more, and there was no way that we'd actually hand out £1,700 worth of stamps by mistake because it's an enormous amount.
What did you think at the time might have caused that discrepancy?
I just couldn't understand it at all. We couldn't get our heads around the fact that we'd got more now than we had on the last balance, and we'd had no deliveries, and we've been selling them in between. So we presumed it was something the computer was showing that was not correct.
Did you contact the post office about this?
When it came to the balance, yeah. Once we realised we couldn't find how this could have happened, I contacted the helpline, yeah.
And what did you ask them?
I told them that exactly that we've got more stamps now than I had previously. We've had no deliveries, and the response was, it's cash or a cheque, how are you going to pay? You know, you're responsible for paying for it.
How was that discrepancy resolved?
They took £850 out of 2 consecutive remuneration salaries to claim it back.
How did it make you feel to be made to repay that amount?
I still at that time was naive enough to believe that a transaction correction may come through to put this right.
I'd like to ask you a little more about some of the shortfalls that you experienced.
Yeah.
You've mentioned a transaction correction. What was the first discrepancy that you experienced when you took over your branch?
The first is, it wasn't so much a discrepancy. Yes, I suppose it was. It was a transaction correction came through. I'd only been in there a very short time. Sure, it was less than 2 weeks. And for quite a few £100, and it was from the previous postmaster, because a lot of the time transaction corrections used to take weeks to come through. And this was a strange thing, because any discrepancies that were down had to be made good straight away. But when it was, say it was up or anything like that, or it should have been up, it used to take weeks to come through. In the meantime, you had to make it good until the correction came through, and then you could take the money back out again. But with this case, when I rang up about it, it was from the previous sub-postmaster that had it before me. And they told me that I had to pay it, and I'd have to sort it out with him, with the previous owner.
Did you recover the money?
No.
You've told us about the shortfall you experienced of £1,700 in May 2008. You then experienced a significant shortfall in September 2008, is that right?
Yes.
What was the value of that shortfall?
I get a little bit mixed up. I'm pretty sure it was 6,000. It might have been 4 because it was going up in chunks like that, but it was either 4 or 6,000.
I think your statement mentions 2 shortfalls, in fact, in September 2008.
Yeah.
The first one of £9,000.
Oh, right,
Does that
okay.
sound correct?
Yeah, it does, yeah.
What efforts did you make to investigate the cause of that shortfall?
Well, when that one came up, it was, it was obviously startling. And the guy that I'd worked with, who'd had his own post office for 30-odd years, who'd been working with me for quite a long time, he stayed till midnight with me while we got absolutely every piece of paperwork out that we could and tried to trace any possibility that a £9,000 transaction had been entered incorrectly. And there was no sign of anything like that. So we knew straight away alarm bells were going off about the system, about any way we can reconcile this. And this is where the proper nightmare sort of started, really.
So you said you tried to investigate it. You couldn't get to the bottom of the problem. What did you do?
Well, from how they treated the £1,700 one, I didn't tell them, because I knew that they were just going to immediately make steps to remove this £9,000, and there was no way I could absorb that. I managed to absorb the 1,800 with my, with the turnover and the savings and the business and everything, but the 9,000 I was not going to be able to do. So I decided not to tell them about that, and we'll carry on working to try and get to the bottom of it.
And when it came to balancing, what action did you take at that stage?
I inflated the figures just so that we could roll this over, so that we could carry on the next day, which I've heard a lot of people have said the same thing.
You experienced another large discrepancy in the same month, September 2008. You mentioned the figure of £4,000. Does that sound about?
Yeah, it was either 4 or 6,000 was the next one. Yeah.
What action did you take to investigate that shortfall?
Same thing, really. We started, we'd already got all the documentation from the previous one, and we started trying to do the same thing, but panic was setting in at this. I mean, I was already panicking, to be honest, at 9,000, but when this shot up more, panic was starting to set in because we knew we were only going to be able to get the same sort of paperwork out of the system to go through it again. So we were just to go through every single transaction to see if any large ones had gone in that was like, oh, what's this? You know, that wasn't quite right, and things like that. And nothing, there was nothing there again to show any dodgy transaction that we'd accidentally done or anything like that.
What did you do to try and rectify?
Again, there was no way of rectifying it, you know, yourself, because you couldn't get into the system any further than just the printouts that postmasters are allowed to see.
You've described the figure increasing in your statement. How did that come about?
Every balance was a nightmare, and you'd literally be, your heart would be pounding really, because you're putting all the figures in, you're checking all the stock in the branch, and then you'd press the infamous button to see how it worked, how it balanced, and it'd come up with even more discrepancy.
You've explained in your statement that particular discrepancy escalated. Do you recall ultimately what figure it came to?
I remember when it was at 16,000 something, and then it's all a bit of a blur really, because it was just every balance it was going up. There was no balances since from the original one that were close or much better. They were all just larger and larger discrepancies. There was only us two working there, and we were both panicking about the whole situation. There was no way anyone was actually pocketing this money or anything like that, you know. We were drilling down as best we could into, and we were watching each other, checking what each other were doing to make sure neither of us was making some silly mistake. We knew we weren't, but we just doubled down on it, you know, and it was just going up and up and up.
I'm going to ask you now about an audit of your accounts which took place on the 12th of February of 2009. Do you recall how that audit came about?
Yeah, similar to what somebody else said, I was asked to remit out of the branch some money because Alderledge is quite a wealthy area. We had a surplus of money more than paying out benefits and things like that. So when it got to a certain stage, you remitted it out of the branch to keep a sensible level of cash in. And they asked me to remit out, I think it was 50,000, and I knew I couldn't at that point, so I didn't remit the money out. And the very next day, an auditor was on the doorstep.
How did you feel when you found out this audit was going to be carried out?
Well, it was a mixture really. I knew I was in trouble with this, but I was also relieved because I thought, well, whatever's going to happen from here, at least now it's not going to be me hiding it anymore. Something will get to the bottom of this. So I knew that it was going to open this can of worms, but I was kind of relieved at the same time. Mixed feelings.
What did you tell the auditor upon his arrival?
The first thing he said to me was, do you have the cash in the branch that you have declared that you hold? And I said, no. And so he said, right, okay, lock the door. Sign went up to say, you know, close for the day. And I genuinely thought, right, this is where they're going to drill down into the situation and they'll find it. They'll find this, you know. But instead he rang the internal, well, I'd say the post office's fraud investigation team and more auditors as well. So the two guys from the fraud people came, and about, I think it was 5, including him, 4 more people came to do the so-called audit, which wasn't really an audit. They just did another balance, just the same as I would have done. what
did they find when they...
Well, I knew at this stage it had grown to 40,000 and so many pounds. But when I had to sit in my office at the back, wasn't allowed behind the counter, so to speak, and they came up with the final figure and it had gone up another 4,000, so it was 44,000 something. And that was my final discrepancy, you know, that they gave to me.
You've said the fraud investigation team arrived at your branch. What did they tell you?
Well, the first thing they said was, anything you say, maybe, you know, we suspect you've committed, committed a crime. Everything you say, maybe taken down and using evidence against you and things like that. So I realised straight away that I was going to be treated as a potential criminal, not even before anything's even been looked at properly. You know.
So they cautioned you.
Yeah.
How did that make you feel?
Well, I just thought, right. I felt that this was deepening straight away, you know, the trouble for me, if you said to me, was deepening straight away.
Did you receive contact from your contracts manager at that
Not
time?
then, no.
You were interviewed the same day, is that
Yeah.
right? Where did that take place?
I was driven from Alderledge to Macclesfield, which is about 6 miles, to their main branch, and I've been using that branch for years. I was surprised to note that when you went upstairs, there was an interview room with tape recording facilities and just like a police station, really. So I was taken into there.
Were you represented during your interview?
No.
Were you told that you had a right to be represented?
Now, I can't actually remember whether they actually offered me that or not, being completely honest. I couldn't say for sure that they didn't offer me that.
Did anyone accompany you?
No.
In the interview? Who carried out the interview?
There was 2 chaps from the post office, and they're fraud people, yeah.
How was the interview conducted?
It started off, it seemed to be a little bit like this, a little bit of fact-finding, but it soon turned into, where's the money? Have you taken the money? And he kept repeating that, and I ended up having to say to him, it doesn't matter how many times you ask me, have I taken the money? I'm not going to change my answer because I've not taken the money. So he then stood up, became a little bit more aggressive, leaning over me. Have you taken the money, in a more aggressive sort of manner? And I just carried on telling him the same thing, that I had never taken the money. There's no point me taking the money. I was responsible for everything in the post office. But he carried on with that, line of questioning.
What other inquiries were made by the investigators?
He then told me that they were going to search my house either with a warrant or with my permission. So I said, well, come now. Come and have a look at it now. So which they did. I jumped in their car and they drove me to my house, which wasn't too far away, and they searched the house.
Did they request access to your bank statements?
Yeah.
Did you agree to provide them?
Yeah, and full access to, I think I've got 2 accounts on my business account, full access to everything, yeah.
On the day of your audit, the branch was closed, is that
Yeah.
correct? And your appointment as a sub-postmaster was suspended?
Yeah.
Is that right? What effect did your suspension have upon your salary from the post office?
Well, it immediately stopped. They did actually, they paid me up to that day, if you see what I mean. That they, whatever had accrued from the previous salary up to the day of suspension, they did pay me, but then it stopped.
You've explained earlier that when you purchased the branch, you weren't actually purchasing the premises themselves.
No, that's right.
Who owned the premises?
It was owned by a company that actually, their offices were above, but they did own quite a lot of the things in Alderley Edge and in other towns as well. They were quite a big concern, really. But luckily they were upstairs, so I did know them slightly from that, from being upstairs.
Did you pay rent to use the premises?
Yes, yeah.
When your salary with the post office stopped, did that relieve you of your obligations to pay rent in
No,
respect of the
it
premises?
didn't, no. They told me that they could put somebody else in to run it. And the first person, they said, we found somebody that will run this, but he'll only give you 10% of the salary. Well, I knew straight away that this was going to cause big problems with the rent, because the rent was 19,000 and the business rates were another 7,500. So the 10% of the salary coming in from the post office was going to put me in arrears straight away. So I refused that, and somebody locally from the village who'd worked in there before as a temporary person agreed to take it over.
What did they pay you?
Well, they agreed to pay me the original portion, basically, of the business that was the rent from the post office. But after a few weeks, he started to pay me about half of that, saying that they weren't getting enough in, and immediately trouble was happening with the landlords upstairs, who then accused me of subletting, really, which technically I was. I was allowing somebody else to run that, pay me to give them.
What effect did this have on your business?
Well, it was already snarling up quite quickly, because with the post office, and especially this one, there's a lot coming in, lots of money coming in, and a lot going out, but it left enough to have a decent living. As soon as that dried up, the money going out didn't dry up, and it didn't take long before I was in arrears.
Your appointment as a sub-postmaster was ultimately terminated, is that right?
Yeah.
What was the reason given for the termination?
They believed for false accounting, and I can't remember whether they said theft on it, but for falsifying the accounts was there first.
Do you recall when you were terminated?
No, it was a few months later, but I can't recall exactly, no.
What did you do when they terminated your appointment?
Well, I'd still got the shop part at the front. I was not allowed, from the moment of being suspended, I was not allowed behind the post office branch anymore. And I'd still got the shop part at the front. But obviously I couldn't afford to keep stocking this because of the money that was coming in from the post office and from the shop. I was giving it all to the landlords to try and keep this going, because at that time we'd got a buyer, possible buyer for it, who, even though I'd paid 154,000, he was only going to pay me 57,000. But at that time, it was anything we could do to mitigate this circumstance. As it turned out, the day before we were supposed to exchange, not contracts, but, you know, go ahead with it, he pulled out. And that just really did, that meant it was ruined. Because the landlords had been, they were sympathetic to my situation, but for only for so long. And when they found out that this guy had pulled out, they just foreclosed me then.
What was the effect of that on your business?
Well, that was it. It was finished. It was closed down.
How did you resolve the obligations you had in relation to the lease on the premises?
I couldn't. I went for a few more meetings with the landlord, and with a commercial lease, you were liable for it to the end, and there was another 5 years on this lease, which would have equated to 90,000. And he asked me if I'd got property, and I said yes. And he was like this, as if to say, we'll probably have to have that, you know. But luckily, looking back, next to the post office was actually a bar, and the bar expressed and the landlords, they were the same landlords, they expressed interest about expanding into the post office. And I think if it wasn't for that, they would have probably bankrupted me and gone for my property. But because they were going to move in, I got an email saying you've got 7 days to get £5,000 together and you can walk away from the lease.
How did you raise that money?
I managed to sell all my things that I'd got at the time, which was guitars and musical instruments and everything that I could get my hands on there and then. I managed to sell and raise near enough the 5,000 to get out of this lease, which was a relief because I genuinely believed they were going to go after my house.
You had suppliers who had been providing stock to your business. Mm-hmm. What action did they take when you closed?
Obviously, I couldn't pay the stock, and so I had county court judgments, quite a few, against me.
You were charged by the post office with theft and false accounting.
That's
Is
right.
that right?
Yeah.
What effect did it have on you to be charged with these offences?
Oh, it was absolutely terrible. You know, it was awful. It was just getting worse and worse and worse. It was humiliating, really, because at that time, before I was foreclosed, I had to sit in the shop part at the front. I wasn't allowed behind the counter, so people were coming up to me saying, "Come on, Scott, what are you doing here? You know, get behind the counter, it's busy." And I couldn't say to them, "Oh, I've been suspended through possible theft and false claim." So it was just humiliating from there onwards, and it just got worse. But once the summons to be, actually taken through to court came, then obviously my world fell in a little bit, really. You know, I knew this was going to be very, very serious. Well, I knew it was already, but it was just getting worse and worse.
What steps did you take to obtain legal representation?
I only managed to be able to get the basic legal aid, which I don't think you can even get that now, almost like a duty barrister, if you see what I mean, that was prepared to accompany me to Crown Court and stuff like that.
What advice did you receive?
Well, it basically said to me, despite the stuff about the computer and stuff like that, as far as he was concerned, there was no way of getting to the bottom of the information that they needed. So on balance, because I had signed the accounts off, despite not being guilty of theft, it's going to be very difficult to say not guilty about false accounting when I'd signed them off. So he advised me to plead guilty.
Your first court appearance was in, I think, January 2009. Is that right?
I think it was,
as you recall.
Yeah.
The first time your trial was listed, it didn't go ahead, is that right?
It didn't go ahead. The post office didn't come. Everybody else was in position, but the post office didn't come, citing bad weather and things like that. So it was adjourned.
When your trial was listed for a second time, the post office dropped the charge of theft against you.
That's
is that right? How did that come about?
Well, on the day, we were sat in the consultation room before going in, and my barrister said, "Oh, look what I've got here, you know." I got post office headed notepaper that said, "Despite investigating Mr. Darlington's accounts and everything else, and bank balances and his lifestyle through searching my house, we can find no evidence or indication of any theft." But I believe that they would have still tried me for theft if it wasn't for the fact that we'd got sight of this
So
document.
you were shown a document
Yeah,
that was produced by the post office,
yeah,
which said there was in fact, no evidence of theft by you.
yeah.
What did your barrister do?
Well, he took it to see their legal team and came back to see me about 5 minutes later saying that they're going to drop the theft charge. This was about 5-10 minutes before actually going in for my trial.
How did it feel to learn that you'd been charged with theft when the post office investigator had concluded there was no evidence against you?
I was amazed that it was like this. It did start to feel like a bit of a sort of game, if I'm honest. You know, 1 minute I'm going in for theft, and the next, even though there was no evidence, and the next minute we see a document saying there was no evidence, and it was only the fact that we highlighted that we'd seen it that they dropped this, you know, charge of theft.
The charges of false accounting were proceeded with,
Yeah.
that's right. How did
Yeah.
you plead to those charges?
I was advised that I'd probably have to plead guilty. I would have to plead guilty.
And is that what you did?
Yeah.
And could you tell me if you remember anything about what your barrister said about how it came to be that he saw this document, if it was a he?
I vaguely remember him saying, "I don't think we were supposed to see this," as if to say it had come through to us with other documents that possibly wasn't for us, you know, but that's all I can really remember about that side.
So just to try and put some flesh on that, you probably understand, at least in basic terms, that the prosecution had to disclose relevant documents to you. But so on that morning before the trial, did they actually disclose some documents, and this was amongst them? Or
I think
or
it
what?
might have been that, because he's just said, hey, look what we've got here, you know,
Right.
like this, you know, and I was like, oh, right. And he went off to see their legal team and came back saying they dropped the theft charge.
Right, I see. Okay.
You, having pleaded guilty to the false accounting, you were sentenced to 2 months imprisonment.
Yes.
Is that right? But it was suspended for 2 years.
Yeah.
You were also ordered to carry out 120 hours of community service.
Yeah.
Is that correct? Was your conviction reported in the press?
Yes, yeah.
Do you recall where?
It was in the Macclesfield Express, which is where I live, and it was in the Manchester Evening News as well.
What effect did the reporting have on you?
Well, the Macclesfield one, it was embarrassing really, because there was a big picture of me, you know, and everything, and I'm relatively well known where I live, and obviously there's me pleading guilty, you know. What are people going to think? You know, he pled guilty, and a picture of me that the shots from the court coming out, and a big article about me. So I had to face the humiliation, embarrassment of, you know, facing this up.
You explained in your statement after you were convicted, the post office brought an application against you under the Proceeds of Crime Act.
That's
Is that
right. It was a little short time after. I'd just like to say as well, the Manchester Evening News one said, "Postmaster who cooked the books is spared jail," and a big picture of me. That was the headline, and we complained to the Press Complaint Commission about that, and they upheld it. And then they had to come out and do another more, should we say, balanced article about it. But the damage had been done then. I'd already got comments online saying, "Trusted person in that position, you deserve everything that happens to you," and "not trustworthy." And there's a lot of comments like that, which obviously is not very nice to read, when, especially when you know you haven't taken any money or actually done anything wrong, really. But then after that, after the court case, I didn't think it was over as such, but I was relieved that whatever had happened to me, it was over. And then next thing through the post comes the Proceeds of Crime Act, yeah.
What was the purpose of that application?
It said that they believed that I'd been paying my mortgage on the proceeds of crime, and they wanted me to surrender the lease, my mortgage, the lease to the shop, keys to my car, passport, driving licence and stuff like this. I wasn't allowed to leave the country or travel anywhere without telling them.
You've explained a restraining order was put in place against you whilst the application was pending, is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
To what did the restraining order relate?
I wasn't allowed to travel anywhere, and I had to. I can't remember everything that was on it, but I basically had to inform of my whereabouts and things like that if I wasn't going to be at home, that kind of thing.
How did the application under the Proceeds of Crime Act conclude?
I do remember when I got this Proceeds of Crime Act, I typed it into Google, and the first thing, because I'd never even heard of this, to be honest, the first thing it said was, Proceeds of Crime Act are notoriously difficult to remove. And I was just like, oh, God, you know, this is getting worse, and I'm going to have to tell. At this point, I wasn't with the mother of my daughter, although we still shared the mortgage and things like that on the house. I thought, I'm going to have to explain this now to my ex-partner, who were friendly, about the possibility of them taking the house and everything. So the horror of that was appalling, you know. I showed it to my barrister that had represented me in the court case, and I can't remember the full details, but it got thrown out. I can't remember exactly the process that it got thrown out, but it got thrown out.
I'd like to ask you now about the effect that these events have had on you.
Mm-hmm.
Dealing firstly with the financial impact, how much do you think you've paid to the post office to make good the shortfalls that were shown by Horizon?
Well, I never paid them back anything from the 44,000, but I paid them the 1,800, and there was a few £100 here, a few £100 there. So I would reckon about 2,000 to 2,500, but I didn't pay them anything back from the original shortfall.
You've explained your landlord terminated your lease. What losses did that cause you?
Well, it meant that I couldn't pay the mortgage because there was still £80,000 outstanding on the loan that I'd taken out against my house to buy the post office. I couldn't pay this anymore. I couldn't pay any of the debts to the suppliers, which I just had on an ongoing quarterly basis. Now as county court judgments everywhere. And I was in the mire. I was even told I couldn't claim unemployment benefit because I was behind on national insurance payments, even though the post office took them from the source. So it just got worse and worse. I was put on like a safety net benefit, of £52.25 a week to survive.
What did you do with the loan that you'd taken out from the bank?
I had to, with my ex-partner, I had to sign my half of the house over to her. For her to change it to an interest-only mortgage, they wanted my name off the mortgage, so I signed over the ownership fully to her so that an interest-only mortgage could be negotiated so that she could pay this by reducing it a lot down to an area where she could actually afford, because I couldn't afford to contribute at all.
You've explained you lost your salary from the post office as a result of your suspension, and then you were later convicted. What effect did your conviction have upon your ability to obtain other work?
It was devastating, really, because I'm now aged, I think, 49, 50, with a new criminal record for dishonesty. And I did actually apply to AstraZeneca quite soon after my conviction and passed my interview and assessment. But because they're one of the firms that can turn down employment based on CRB checks, I got an email saying, unfortunately, after the CRB check, we're not going to take you on, we're not obliged to, and we're not going to take you on. And I spent 3.5 years unemployed then, after that.
How did you survive without any income?
I just had the £52.25 a week to survive on and housing benefit. And at that point, I was house sharing with somebody. And the benefit went down. And I had to explain to the guy I was house sharing with that it's going down, that the housing benefit that they're going to pay. Are you okay with this? And he just had to put up with it, so he was affected too. So the whole thing was just so sort of humiliating and embarrassing. I was in such a deep hole with this, couldn't get any job. Filling in forms saying that you've got a criminal record, I could tell that this was not going to go anywhere really, especially at my age, as well, of being at that age.
You've explained you signed your house over to your wife. Where did you, forgive me, your partner?
Yeah.
Where did you then live?
I was house sharing with somebody where it was his house, and he let me have a bedroom for 3.5 years.
Have you been left with debts as a result of the loss of your business?
Well, there's still the outstanding mortgage to this day.
What's the value of that?
I think it's approximately 65,000. It's still being interest only that my ex-partner is paying herself.
What financial losses have your family suffered?
Well, my father had to pay £1,200 a council tax to get me through the last month of this, having the post office branch. And I've not been able to pay maintenance to my ex-partner for my daughter or anything. So, you know, she's had consequential losses and has been paying this mortgage on our behalf, you see, to me, because the money was set against the house.
What effect did the actions of the post office have upon your health?
Well, extreme anxiety, I mean, humiliation and embarrassment turned into depression and anxiety, really, when you realise that it's going to be very, very difficult to get out of this situation. And at that point, there didn't seem to be any way of starting, any way of trying to reverse the situation, you know, because I'd been put through the courts, I'd pled guilty, all the rest of it. I'd almost dug a deeper hole, almost, if you see what I mean. But I was in a pretty bad state, and I didn't want to go out. Every time I went out, people would say to me, "Oh, how's it going with the post office?" You know, you stop wanting to go out and bump into that situation, so you end up becoming a bit withdrawn, and depression, and I'd say anxiety. The anxiety was the worst part, which linked to depression and everything.
Did you seek any medical help?
This was another thing. I didn't really, because also on applications for jobs, there's a box to tick where you've got to say if you've got any mental health problems or you've been treated for any psychological problems, and I didn't want to exacerbate things by A, a fresh conviction, and B, I'm having treatment for mental health as well. I thought this was going to make things worse for getting a job, and I was desperate to try and get some sort of work to have some kind of income. So I didn't go to the doctors about it. In hindsight, I should have done. I have been to the doctors a few times, but during that period, I avoided going to the doctors and just tried to live with it.
You had been living with your ex-partner originally when you first took on the branch.
Yeah.
How was your relationship with her affected by what happened?
Well, funnily enough, we split up before the actual problems of the post office, but obviously it exacerbated our relationship because we'd got this nightmare on top of the split and everything. But in fairness, she's been pretty level-headed about the whole thing, and somehow she's managed to put up with it and carry on paying the mortgage for her daughter's sake, and her own, of course. And we're okay. We're okay on a general level.
How has your daughter been affected?
She was 8 when this started, and she's 22 now. So the whole of her childhood, really, formative years, have been through her dad having, during her dad having this problem. And surprisingly, she's been very good. But I know it must have affected her. But she's been very good at not showing many signs of that.
Your conviction was overturned in April last year.
Yes.
Is that correct? What steps did you take to secure the overturning of your conviction?
Well, originally, feeling like I was the only one with this problem, I discovered the JFSA through just basically using the internet. I realised there was other people, came across Alan Bates and started going to the meetings in Huddersfield, and that gave you some hope when we all realised there was something wrong here, and Alan was, determined to try and get something going. So it all stemmed from that, really, all the way through to having my conviction overturned.
How long did it take?
Well, from 2010 to 2021.
Your father's still alive, is that right?
Father's still alive, yeah.
And he learned that your conviction had been overturned, is that correct?
Amazingly, he's managed to survive, still being there for hearing that, yes.
And you've now found a new partner, is that right?
Yeah.
Has she been affected by what happened to you?
Very much, yeah. She's had to put up with the whole thing right from the beginning. So she's had the consequential losses of having to live with me or be with me, my lack of income, that my mental state. I mean, I've tried to be strong through it, but it's all relative. So she's been affected quite a lot, pretty much the same as me, I would say.
How do you feel now about the treatment that you received from the post office?
Well, disgusted. Absolutely disgusted. Atrocious. It's hard to believe that this could actually go on for so long, especially when it's turned out that they did know there was problems.
What steps do you think need to be taken to put these matters right?
Well, the truth's got to come out. This inquiry is obviously going to help a lot, but they can't hide behind anything anymore. I genuinely believe that they never, ever thought they would be in this position. The power of that organisation against individuals with, without the power or the finances to take this on. They were safe in the knowledge that they could sail through all this and we could just remain to be collateral damage. So that's got to change. That the actual truth has got to be eked out of this situation.
Thank you, Mr. Darlington. I don't have any further questions for you. I'll ask the chair if he wishes to ask you any questions.
Okay.
No, as you will have observed, I asked my question when I felt like it. So thank you very, very much for coming. And what you've told me is invaluable. And it's just with all the other people who are coming, building up a very vivid picture for me to look at and understand.
Right, thank you, Simon.
Forgive me, Mr. Darlington, there's one matter I would like to raise, if I may.
Of course.
You have a brother, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Has he supported you through this process?
My brother's helped me throughout it. I'm not sure how I would have coped the same if it hadn't been for my brother.
Can you describe a little what he's done to support you?
He's been incredible, really. He's dug into it as much as possible. He tried to help during the doomed mediation in 2013-14. He's been there all the way through, and the amount of hours he's put into this on top of his own life and job, it's just, I don't know how he's been able to do as much as he has.
Has that had a cost for him?
It must have had, yeah. Well, for a start, he put 17,000 in at the beginning, and he's never once brought that up. He hasn't been doing this to try and get that back. He's been doing it to try and help me, his younger brother. And I could never thank him enough.
Thank you. Is there anything you'd like to say that we've not covered in our evidence?
I'd like to say what I'd like to happen from here. What I would like is, first of all, is the correct compensation. Not some sort of argued down, watered down compensation, which I'm sure the Post Office will try to do. It needs to be the correct amounts, not some kind of legally argued down situation about it. I'd like to know who okayed the attritional strategy that was used against the sub-postmasters, especially after Second Sight released their interim report, and I think which was 2013, which left them in no doubts there was problems, to actually to dumb down and go even further attritional from there, to me is astonishing. And well, I just can't see how they can explain that. I'd definitely like to know who's okayed all that and who put that lot together. The anxiety that they piled on time and time again throughout this, closing Second Sight reports when we thought something was very helpful to us. They closed all that down. We get to the Horizon trial, it undermined that as much as they could. Every time this undermining came along, it just rose the anxiety for everybody, because I'm sure the other postmasters will say the same, and if not, it's just me. Just when you thought that some truth was coming out, they pulled the rug out, or attempted to pull the rug out, and trying to get the judge to accuse himself, appealing everything, throwing whatever money was required at it, just increased the anxiety. And even now, I'm suffering from anxiety about the compensation. We're not there yet. What is this going to be an insult? Is it going to be correct? You can never trust how this is going to work out. The settlement agreement, they've been saying since then that it was all done in good faith. There was no good faith in my ahead there. There was no good faith. Saying that they only learned about the big costs we had were from the media. I mean, it's just like an insult, really. So the whole truth has to be revealed, otherwise it won't feel like justice, just handing out some money and one or two people getting a slap on the wrist about it. The lessons learned thing, and we got things wrong, it's not true. It was a deliberate policy to treat us like this, especially after they found out there were some problems. I would like to know how that has come about and been through to this day. So it's those things, really. Yeah, I don't want another apology because you can't say sorry for that. They weren't genuine mistakes. This was an attritional policy used against us, which to this day I cannot understand why they went as far as they did to ruin us and carried on trying to close it. I mean, we've heard what people have had to say. It's been tear-jerking hearing previous people to me, and to think that the Post Office was still trying to stop it during the Horizon trial and appeals, and ever since, up until pretty much this public inquiry.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you again.
Thanks very much for letting me speak.
Chair, that concludes our evidence for this afternoon.
All right. Back to 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, yes, Mr. Blake? Yeah. All right then. 10 o'clock tomorrow morning.